Hi, everyone. This is Lauren Steiner, and I'm doing a remote broadcast with my correspondent from the People's Summit, Alison Levey, who is a New York City journalist and host of the podcast Connect the Dots. How you doing there, Alison?
Oh, it's been a really exciting 2 days, Lauren. Terrific gathering, a lot of enthusiasm. It's kind of for people who were following the Bernie Sanders campaign and active on a host of fronts on environmental, media, food, rights, racial justice, environmental justice, all of these different topics. You know, we've had a hard battering over the last 6 months, both with the election, with the initiatives of Donald Trump, as well as with this kind of deadlock in terms of lack of pushback to what's been going on with our country. So it's really almost like a revival, a revisioning of the original Sanders movement here over this weekend in Chicago.
Can you tell me what some of the sessions are about?
There were several sessions today that were focusing on the media. And so they really kind of went in depth. There was one session that featured Amy Goodman, Katrina Vanden Heuvel, and Naomi Klein, a rather exceptional session of leading media leaders. And it was hosted by and moderated by Jane Sanders. So we had a lot of, in that panel, Naomi Klein really gave a kind of interpretation of what's been going on in our country over the last several years, where people have been waking up, forced by the 2008 financial crisis and other things, to the fact that our economy and our democracy aren't really working for the people anymore. And yet the establishment parties on the both, the liberal and on the right have not really, have been kind of going along with anywhere from creeping neoliberalism to rampant fascism and not really listening to the people and using the word resistance, but really not coming up with anything more effective than what Jane Sanders repeatedly said were side issues and news bites and news controversies that are kind of manufactured. And she really advised very strongly that everyone present get on with the job of recreating our democracy in a better way and just ignore those things. So it was really refreshing and a reviving of the original kind of hopes and urgencies that we have to restore democracy and protect the earth.
Right. Now, I've been at home watching some of the sessions on the live stream and also watching some of the comments that have been coming out there. And a good friend of mine, respected activist Chelsea Lyons Kent, who was a Bernie delegate from Hawaii. She was the one who gave the finger when Hawaii was announcing the results of the delegates on the floor there in Philadelphia. And she spent a lot of time in Standing Rock. She posted a comment that generated a lot of chatter called, "The People's Summit is as establishment as fuck." And so we were trying to get at what she meant by that. And she seems to think that the sponsors, who I disagree with being establishment, PDA, Food and Water Watch, the Nurses Union, I don't really see how those could be called establishment because they're not corporations. They're not like Priorities USA and George Soros, which is supporting Indivisible, which is being called the MIC resistance or the corporate resistance. So have you heard any talk about that? I mean, she's actually there. She exempted the activists who are in attendance, but I think her remark was more directed to the organizers.
Well, I haven't heard talk about the organizers, but what I've been hearing, what I've also been doing throughout the day is attending the main session talks and getting little sound quotes and putting them up on my Facebook page, short quotes, and people have been responding to them, the different things that the different speakers have said, which, I'm digesting here for you and the audience of Robust Opposition and everything. But one of the things that I have heard is that there is profound distrust out there, and people kind of can't believe it. It's too good to be true. They're frightened and concerned. They don't think, they're not even clear that this group is an establishment Democrat, and they're not establishment Democrats. So if there is any shout out of reassurance that I would like to make about this group, it's that just because we're talking about progressive issues, just because we're talking about immigrant rights, Black Lives Matter, Standing Rock, and other things, that doesn't somehow, in some people's minds, that equates to, mainstream Democrats and what, Democratic Party has been about. Now, don't make any mistake about it. A lot of the breakout sessions here have really been to help people get together for effective organizing and electing non-corrupted officials to government office. But the notion that we're trying to, that this initiative is about building the Democratic Party or moving it somewhere. I mean, a lot of these people are running on socialist democratic lines. Some may be running on democratic lines, but it's really more about the nexus of progressive policies that these people are standing for, rather than whatever party they may happen to be in. That's almost like negligible. But I think the Democratic Party, that they're kind of really worried that somehow it's going to be another Democratic Party takeover. And in a way, that's an understandable fear after what we've all been through.
Yes. Well, I'm very concerned about the purity police. And then, of course, what's called the purity police.
Uh-huh.
In other words, there were people out there who were saying, well, because the democratic socialists have the word democratic in them, they're not even socialist enough. Mm-hmm. And people are complaining that Kshama Sawant, with the socialist alternative, was not allowed to speak. And there's all this conspiracy floating around that Tulsi Gabbard was not allowed to speak. She's officially saying it was a scheduling conflict, but my sources tell me that they weren't able to control what she was going to say. And as you know, Tulsi has been very anti-imperialist, which is the other thing that they're criticizing Bernie for. With all this talk about Jeremy Corbyn, and I was just watching a panel with Becky Bond and Claire Sandberg, who did digital organizing for Bernie. Apparently, Claire went over to help Jeremy Corbyn, yeah. And he has been compared to Bernie Sanders. However, he was much more, and has always been much more anti-imperialist than Bernie. And so I'm concerned right now, having heard Glenn, I don't know if you saw the opening session of the Left Forum with Glenn Ford, in which he talked about how the Democratic Party is the ruling class and what they stand for is imperialism at home and abroad, and basically extracting all the wealth out of our country and the world. And that's the neoliberal experiment that we've been undergoing for the last 35 years. Bernie never challenges neoliberalism. And
There's been a lot of trashing of neoliberalism, I can tell you. And there's also been discussion of imperialism and wars and the draining of our economy on military expenses and foreign wars, and the fact that we're at a choice point and a turning point where if we're going to empower people and improve Black lives and all lives, we can't really be indulging in this militarism abroad, and people are very much connecting the dots in that regard. So we haven't heard Bernie. We're going to hear him tonight. I'm sure that's going to be live streamed, and you'll link people up to that. So it'll be interesting to see what he actually has to say about it. But in fact, many of the speakers have been targeting that precise thing. And there have been a diversity of voices. I think one of the things that really can be said about this is that there's an attempt to make it intersectional. So people may be drawn in from their various vantage points of their various issues, whether it's healthcare or whether it's the environment or whether it's education or whatever it is. But they're all, and so it's not like everyone has to agree on every issue, but the whole idea is that people are going to be coming into an umbrella thing, and we're going to have to all hold hands around some of these different issues. I see that one of our guests has just arrived here, so we can maybe bring him in and then segue the whole situation. So
okay, great.
Yeah, we're gonna. Yeah, he can come right in right now. So I'm just going to say for our listeners that we're expecting Chase Iron Eyes, who's a Native American who's played a tremendous role at Standing Rock. He's here at the People's Summit, and he's going to be coming right here and sitting down and joining me and Lauren, and we're going to have a conversation about Standing Rock and the environment, and then the subsequent guests will be talking about the Lakota Law Project.
My name is Chase Iron Eyes. I am a citizen of the Standing Rock Nation, the Standing Rock Sioux. I was born and raised there. I am now an attorney, and I live on Standing Rock. And we are directly south of the pipeline. The Standing Rock and the No Dapple movement represented one of the most high impact, monumental, historical movements that brought together people from all different walks of life, no matter your skin color, what language you were born into, your religion or your worldview or whatever it was. We were all able to transcend those human classifications and come together in defense, in protection of water, of Mini-Wee-Choni. Even just to say those words, Mini-Wee-Choni, or water is life, has such powerful connotations of a natural element being held sacred by a worldview or a cosmology that we are truly blessed is still around, because we all suffered the forces of colonization, which could probably be represented by the logic and institutions of capital and private property. We are all original nations somewhere way back, not even that far back in our ancestry. So we can't think of each other as different, as these are specifically Indian people, and I am something other than indigenous, because we were all indigenous at one time.
Hey,
But
Chase,
yes,
hey, can I ask you some questions?
yeah,
Okay. So we were covering, and I interviewed you at Occupy Inauguration. You might remember in the room with Chris Hedges and Jill
okay,
Stein.
absolutely,
Yeah.
yes,
So
I remember now.
you and I have talked before. I want to know what's been going on in North Dakota lately, because we were all very dismayed, of course, when Obama basically expedited that pipeline, and now we kind of, and then of course, as we all predicted, the pipeline has leaked, although not in that particular area. What is the resistance to the pipeline now among the Standing Rock Sioux tribe? And can you address some of the internal situation with Dave Archibald and the tribe themselves? Because there was a lot of chatter on Facebook about them getting paid off, basically, by Energy Transfer Partners.
The state of the struggle right now, the truth is that there is a pipeline underneath the only source of our drinking water for the Standing Rock Nation, the Cheyenne River Sioux Nation, and the millions of people who depend on the Missouri River. And that's hard to stomach. And so our focus has definitely shifted to supporting other pipeline fights, but also making sure that the 815 water protectors who are being criminally charged, who are facing criminal charges, who have put their liberty at risk, we want to make sure that they have adequate representation. And so we're working, Chase Iron Eyes, myself, the Lakota People's Law Project, we're trying to work with the other organizations who are providing legal representation and making sure that Morton County is held accountable for some of the rights violations that took place at now we're finding out at the behest of private oil mercenaries, namely Tiger Swan.
Who is Tiger Swan? Because we're hearing about this lately, that Tiger Swan has come into it, and it turns out that a militarized operation was really operating as through the behest of local authorities. People, groups that have created war in foreign zones are now in this country acting against our native peoples.
That's exactly what happened. It turns out Tiger Swan has roots in Blackwater. You can look this up. It's all being published, breaking story style in The Intercept, and a buddy of mine named Chris Hagan. They're doing some real journalism work here, thankfully, because not only because I was on the ground and in the fight, I noticed when Morton County's sophistication level ratcheted up quite a few notches, because I didn't know about Tiger Swan then, but I knew that they had hired somebody. And now, after talking with other reporters, it's clear that I was being specifically targeted and surveilled and trapped and traced. They knew my every movement. And what is scary is that these companies, these private contractors, who have real world experience, life and death experience in actual oil wars, theaters of war for oil, are operating now on our soil, putting the constitutional rights, the natural rights, the birth rights of every single human being, American citizens or whatnot, in our in our continent, putting our rights at risk. Now, I don't quite remember when. Just to speak to a little bit about the Standing Rock Sioux tribe, Chairman Archambault, some of the other council members who provided the leadership and who built the No DAPL movement into what it was. It was a very powerful spiritual movement, and it continues to be. But the reality is that the tribes, the modern tribal nations that are recognized by the federal government are creatures of federal law and federal Indian law. And so they have created a state of dependency. And so, how they say, he who feeds you has the power to starve you. And 130 years ago, when we became, they imposed poverty on us and dependency, and they would hand out rations. They would make us get in lines, and they would hand out rations so our children could eat. Well, 130 years later, all they do is they close the highway that provides the only source of economic development, the only source of discretionary, disposable income for the native nation, for the tribal government. They put up the most highly militarized roadblock, cut off all that money and job and source of revenue to our government to provide social services. And that forced us, it pinched us, and our leadership had to then demand that the water protectors that they invited to protect our water resources for our children, they then had to tell them to leave. And it was painful to watch. But I don't hold it against Chairman Archambault or the council. I saw what happened, and it was clever. It was brilliantly executed by Tiger Swan or Governor Dalrymple or whoever came up with that plan to pinch us.
And I did a protest when Obama came to Beverly Hills for a Hillary Clinton fundraiser. It was a no DAPL protest. Obama was there. Clinton was there. We had about 50 people. We got great coverage in all the TV stations. And when I was looking for a photograph for the event page, I Googled Obama Standing Rock Sioux Tribe and came across an article in the Washington Post where he actually addressed them in 2014. And one of the things that he said was that he was going to help them out by removing regulatory obstacles to them getting their money from oil development. And it seemed like at the time, when I found it, I thought, oh, wow, this is a smoking gun, because like 2 years ago, they had no problem with this. But, I guess when it became a matter of siting it right under the river, all of a sudden it became a problem. So here we have a situation, okay, because you were talking about other pipeline fights, and I've been following the fight at the Sable Trail pipeline in Florida and the Pecos pipeline in Texas. And now there's a new one that a lot of people don't know about, Chaco Canyon in New Mexico. And I was talking to some of the Native American organizers, and what they told me was out of the 40 tribes, it wasn't tribe, there was another word to describe not a cell. I forget what the word was.
Pueblo, maybe.
Pueblos, yes. Out of the 40 Pueblos, only 4 were against it because most of them wanted the revenue. So this is very disconcerting. I mean, I understand the root of it. It's based on exactly what you said. But what is your, as an organizer, what is your challenge within the movement to try to educate people just like we in the greater environmental movement are trying to educate people that we don't need the oil. We've got the sun, we've got the wind, there's alternative forms of energy, and these also could be economically lucrative.
Those are great points, great questions. What I was able to take from the No DAPL movement and being, we call ourselves the original civilizers of this hemisphere, because we had civilized the entire thing before Columbus had, landed here. What I'm witnessing, in kind of taking stock of American consciousness or Western consciousness is that, and I don't blame the descendants of the people who came here 240 years ago or 500 years ago, but they're not treating our homeland as their homeland. And we as Americans need to get to that point. If I went to Europe or if I went to Japan, I'm going to respect Stonehenge the same way I respect Mount Fuji, the same way I respect the Black Hills. And it's because, people who immigrated here have not been here long enough, maybe not long enough, to form those sacred covenants, but we at least need to consider this our homeland. It can't be, we're going to support the native people in their fight. It's got to be, look, this pipeline's coming through your homeland. It's coming through your water. It's going to impact something that your great-great-grandchildren should be able to inherit and make a living from. A healthy ecosystem is a natural birthright. It's not something of the commons that the corporate state should be allowed to decide that it's going to be developed for the benefit of private corporate profit, while we, the people, bear all the risks that the pipeline will break, and we will suffer dangerous, cancerous poisons because of profit. We simply can't have that. And to top it off, we can't have the arms and institutions of our democracy labeling unarmed water protectors, people who are willing to stand up for water and land, as eco-terrorists or jihadists or what have you. We are patriots, and you who are willing to defend the land, the waters, and the sacred are patriots too.
That brings me to the question that I wanted to ask you, which is how this uprising fits within, but you just answered it, the overall environmental movement. It's that you are modeling how we all should feel and take guardianship and feel protectorship and responsibility for the land.
That's a great point, because I didn't know what an environmentalist was. And I see now how the political culture and pop culture of the West has marginalized, quote unquote, environmentalism as some fringe movement that should be subsumed by the larger forces of capital and property and the further stratification of our society. And I started to think, this isn't a native fight. If you watch over the course of the No DAPL struggle, Tiger Swan, somebody was able to craft that narrative that this was lawful and abiding upholders of law and order who just happened to be white. We have to move to a place now where we've just got to realize that this is our homeland. We have to come together, and because battle lines are being drawn, with the election of Trump, with FBI Director Comey testifying, and at the same time, the Trump administration and the quote unquote, conservatives. I mean, painful, harsh, destructive austerity comes cloaked in quote unquote conservatism. At the same time that we're distracted with that, and we should be, because that could result in impeachment procedures. They're repealing Dodd-Frank and the Affordable Care Act. And so it's not a conspiracy anymore. I mean, this is out in the open. They are drawing the line, saying we are going to stick to the 20th century way of doing things in this corporate-driven, carbon extractive patriarchy that we have imposed around the globe. We're just going to stick with that. And if you want to oppose that, you're going to find yourself surveilled, your rights violated, in jail, or dead. And we have to be very clear that this is what they're doing. And we need to stand in peace, stand in dignity. That's the only way that we will prevail. We cannot respond to them with violence or aggression. And it's hard to do. It's very, very hard to do. I don't even hold it against people who defend themselves or whatever. But as a broad movement, in this arc of justice, we have to stand in the power of peace and dignity.
How can those who don't come from these traditions, who don't have that embedded in their cultural background, what's the simplest way for us to learn that and practice that?
Right. And I've got to leave after this question. But I will tell you that I've met 100 people from Standing Rock. They're not from Standing. They're from Ocheti camps that have come there for their own reasons, who have told me that Standing Rock is the only time and the first time, and we're talking grown adults, saying this is the first time that I have ever prayed. Because the word prayer has its own connotations. In our language, we don't say prayer. We just say you're sending your voice. But in order for human beings here in the 21st century to try to unite or commune or realize that we are all related, sometimes you have to, in our ceremonies, you go without food and water for a little bit of time, and you place yourself in the natural environment, and you're compelled to create these relations with the natural environment, things that we learn as natural resources or animals or what have you. But in our cosmology, those are relations. And so you have to figure out a way either to create a relationship with your food source or get, quote unquote, out into nature. You have to unplug yourself, because that's where, quote unquote, prayer or divine inspiration is waiting. And I don't hesitate to use those words, because I know there is power, and that no matter how doubtful you are, how cynical you are, when you go and put yourself in those places and you truly seek a liberation, you seek knowledge, you seek truth, that these divine powers are waiting with compassion.
Chase, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. You're an inspiration to us all. I know you have to get to your next interview, but we will be following your work and helping you as much as we can.
Thank you so much.
Lily Starling was a co-host of mine on The Robust Opposition when we first started the show, and we did it on YouTube. And she is from California. She is a farmer and a fantastic writer.
Tell us a little bit about what you do.
So I'm a farmer in Northern California. I'm, I think 5 to 7 generations into farming now. So my focus here at the summit has really been about attending the sessions on rural organizing. And it's been pretty fascinating because I was actually in the building progressive movements in rural areas. And they had an excellent panel of women from rural communities all around the country that were speaking and giving their perspective on their projects. And then as soon as the breakout started, I'd say the room was about 75% people who lived in rural areas already. And it was just amazing to hear people get up to the mic and talk about their perspective of what rural communities need. And there was so much emotion and a lot of raw anger. And that was really beautiful for me to see, because I feel like one of my pet issues in this movement is that rural progressives and rural people in general get talked down to. They get carpetbagged in political and progressive movements. People from urban areas paratroop in and try to save them and dictate how we're going to save your community. And the overwhelming feedback from the room was, we don't need you to save us. We don't need you to come in and give us your best ideas about how we should fix our own communities. We already know how to do that. We need you to come in and help us, offer support, offer, knocking on doors, money. Come in and learn first about what we need, And it was so interesting, the intersectionality between what I hear from minority communities in progressive movements is, don't come into our community and tell us how you're going to save us. Come in and with open minds and open ears, listen and take our lead on it.
Yeah, well, let me ask you
Lauren, I just wanted to say something. That's a really interesting point, because we really are hearing the same thing from minority communities. And we don't really think of it this way, but part of our whole thing of, oh, we have to fix this, we have to solve that, we have to help. And while we help, we actually come in with our idea of what the appropriate agenda might be. And it's really different when you've been, in the power seat within your own culture or whatever, to take a step back and say, no, other people are going to show us how to lead, and our role is to really sit back and to listen. Because it's so counter to the whole message of American individualism. And actually, I think that, really noting when one does that and taking a step back is so important to our movement, so that people are empowered to speak for themselves and define their own agenda, and then we listen.
Yeah, that's about it. I miss you, Lauren. I wish you would come. You would be having fun. There's been just unbelievable amount of energy. You may have heard a lot of chatter about, the agendas behind the whole summit, and it'll be interesting to see moving forward after the summit. I know one of the complaints last year, which was fairly prevalent, is that it was a lot of energy and a lot of organization for the event, and then not a lot of follow-up. And my take is that it's on us. Like, the People's Summit doesn't owe us follow-up organization. The whole point is to get us in the room, meeting each other, and then it's up to us to take this back to our homes and our communities and do our best work with it. So
let me ask you a question then. So I was watching a session on electoral politics, and one of the speakers basically said that if we don't have an electoral politics component, we're not. I agree with that, which is why, after being very involved in the Occupy movement, I jumped on the Bernie Sanders bandwagon, because I saw that, I was actually at the Left Forum in 2014, or maybe 2015, when Charles Lenchner said something. He's the co-founder of People for Bernie. And he said there's entrepreneurial activists, meaning people like me and possibly you, who fight on issues like the environment or single payer or what have you. And then there's what he called the consumer activists. And those are just the people that just come out to vote every 4 years. And and People for Bernie was designed to try to unite those two. And I got really excited by that concept and originally started a People for Bernie LA, which we eventually turned into Los Angeles for Bernie Sanders for a variety of reasons. But in any case, I've been trying to do that since the campaign, now going back to the single issue groups and trying to get, like Linda Sarsour said, both at the People's Summit and at the Left Forum, get them out of their single issue silos, working together. And I find that that's really hard to do when there is not a candidate leading the whole thing, which is why, as you know, I support the Draft Bernie movement. So what are your thoughts on that?
It's really, I see it as a generational issue that millennials in particular, who are really spearheading a lot of the energy, not necessarily the, everything. There's people of all ages here. There's people of all ages in the movement. But at least on the West Coast, the tendency is to start an organization rather than check to see if one already exists. And for that reason, there's a tremendous amount of not just dilution in the movement, but ego. And yeah. I think that one of the things that I want to personally work on is there's no point to me in telling people that they should close up shop and merge with another organization if they've already put their heart and soul and money into starting something. But at this point, it's kind of reaching critical inflation. And you're right, we have to get people talking to each other, working together. A huge issue to me is the vote splitting in the progressive races and this kind of rah-rah. Every time someone announces that they want to primary an established candidate and someone says, oh, me too, I want to do that too. We're going to have to start uniting behind single local candidates, not just national candidates. We're going to have to get our organizations talking to each other. And it's at this point, the acceleration of the political sphere, the world the way it is that we need people who aren't effective to be kind of dropping out. Like, I hate to say it, it's brutal, but we're competing for funding, we're competing for media attention, and it's time to really get serious and pull together or maybe send it out. So it's not the most popular thing to say, and I don't say it to a lot of people here, but I think that that's a huge thing, and I think you're right. We do need strong candidates that can bring people together.
Couldn't be better, because our next person that's coming in is a local candidate here in the Chicago area. And actually, some of the most moving speeches at the summit have been, with that. So, I want to thank you so much, Lily, for being with us, and then we'll be talking next with a local candidate here on the ground in Chicago, which is really a great city for change and activism. As a New Yorker myself, I'm really impressed with the amount of activity going on here, where there are new progressive candidates in the realm for the mayor, the governor's seat, and as well as a lot of people organizing in different areas of Chicago. I've really been impressed with the local political organizing here. And so I'm so glad that Lily brought that up, because that's a whole other aspect or sort of theme throughout this People's Summit is really changing government through changing the elected officials. So that's why I'm really happy that we can welcome here today, right now, to the robust opposition. Troy, tell us a little bit about, what you're doing, what you're about, like what changes that you see need to happen, and how you're, dipping in your toe or looking at what you might be actually able to do in terms of changing governance here in Chicago.
Sure. Well, for the 5 years prior to this one, I was a Chicago public school principal. And I watched this administration in City Hall under Rahm Emanuel bring in one parasite after another to suck tax dollars out of our school district and away from the classroom. And after my second year, I decided to speak openly about it. And apparently that was a revolutionary thing to do. It brought a lot of attention my way. People thought I would get fired. But I kept going because the insanity continued. You may have heard of our CEO, Barbara Byrd Bennett.
No, I haven't.
So Barbara Byrd Bennett was the Rahm Emanuel appointed CEO who got a $23 million contract given to her former boss for principal training. And the training was universally condemned by principals. They did a $3 million contract and then another $20 million. During the $3 million contract, it was universally condemned, and they rewarded their poor performance with another $20 million. And so I spoke out. I wrote a piece and put it in the Chicago Sun-Times. Spoke quite openly about how corrupt it was and how corrupt it seemed. Nothing happened. It took an FBI investigation to finally bring to light, and she was finally indicted, and now she is in prison. But this district never took action against her. This mayor's office that appointed her never took action against her. Federal authorities had to come in. So that's just one example. And so at the same time they had this $20 million contract, they took millions from schools. They cut the budgets of schools by anywhere from a few tens of thousands to several $100,000 per school that year. And so as principals, we're looking and we're like, how is it that you're rewarding a $20 million contract to a company that is inept and incompetent, while at the same time taking millions of dollars away from our schools? And it was quite a frustrating thing to endure. And so I began to speak out, and I continued. I went on to do some research on charter schools and a lot of the corrupt management and poor performance of the ones that are in Chicago. And eventually that got me nominated for the presidency of the Chicago Principals and Administrators Association. And after I was nominated for that presidency, I was removed from my position by the administration in City Hall. And it was widely thought that they removed me as a way to prevent me from winning the presidency of the Principals Association.
Okay, first of all, you and I are Facebook friends.
What is your name?
Lauren Steiner. I'm a member of the Badass Teachers Association.
Okay.
I had Marla Kilfoyle on my show back in December. I work with Tina Andres here in California. She speaks really highly of you. And we're having the same issues in Los Angeles right now. I don't know if you just heard, but the charter school candidate won. He unseated the president of the school board, Steve Zimmer. It was the most expensive local school board race in American history. And now the charter school advocates have a majority on that board. And it was seen that a lot of white parents in the upper middle class of the west side of Los Angeles basically supported the challengers, Nick Melvoin, because they are using the charter school system on the west side to sort of avoid having to pay for private schools, which here in Los Angeles start at $30,000 a year. So they took Palisades High School from almost a 50-50 split ethnically to now it's 70% white because when it went charter. So now Eli Broad, whose name you know, I'm sure, we call him the Betsy DeVos of Los Angeles. He has a plan to try to take 50% of LAUSD schools charter in the next, few years. And with the majority on the school board, he is likely to succeed unless we stop it. So I am very concerned, and I want to ask you a very pointed question, because I've noticed that the teachers' unions have not opposed charters. They've tried to make an uneasy peace with them. They've tried to unionize charter school teachers, and they've also gone after accountability and transparency as opposed to trying to eliminate them entirely. What do you think of that strategy?
So I have another strategy. I'll say that. I don't think that's going to get us what we need. What we need is an attack on particular practices that charter schools engage in. So I don't necessarily consider myself an I'll tell you a little story, for example. We have a representative here, a state representative, and I talked to him once about his position on charters, and he said, I'm not against charters, Troy. When a charter chain wants to come into my district, I give them two criteria, and if they can meet those criteria, I'll support their application. The first criteria is that they have to allow collective bargaining on the part of their teachers. The second criteria is that they have to take an attendance boundary. And for some reason, they never take me up on my offer. Now, so what he did was zoom in on two practices that charter schools have that are toxic to students and toxic to the district in terms of deprofessionalizing teaching and in terms of skimming I wouldn't say the top students, but if you have poor students, you have those who are extremely poor and those who are moderately poor. And if you look at, and one good indication for this is to look at free lunch versus reduced lunch. If a student gets reduced price lunch, you can get reduced price lunch and your family makes $40,000. If you're getting free lunch, your family might be getting $10,000 a year. And so what do you think on average the performance of a student from a family making $40,000 versus one making $10,000 is going to be? Right? The student whose family only gets about $10,000 a year has far fewer resources to put toward giving that kid the exposure to things that stimulate the kind of intellectual development that produce academic achievement. And so what you find when you look at charter schools and the lottery enrollment process that's used in charters to get students into charter schools, you will find that in almost every case, the charter schools have a higher percentage of reduced lunch students, and the public schools have a higher percentage of free lunch students. And so you're creating hyper segregation based on income in districts that are already hyper segregated based on race. And so you don't have to be anti-charter to be against that. You hear what I'm saying?
Right.
You don't have to be anti-charter to be against one of the things that we took on in the Principals Association when I came in was to look at policy. And we began to look at expulsion rates in charter schools right here in Chicago. And what we found was that the district average per 100 students, the average public school expelled 0.02. And so you would have to theoretically divide a student up into 50 segments, and the average public school expelled one of those segments for every 100 students they had. The average for charter schools was 5 times as high, but it doesn't stop there. Particular charter chains like Noble Street Charter School here in Chicago, Urban Prep Academy here in Chicago had rates that were far higher than that. One Noble Street school had a rate 251 times, an expulsion rate 251 times the district average. Not 251%, 251 times. And so you don't have to be anti-charter to be against that.
How do you legislate against something like that, though?
And so you identify the core of the problem and you try to craft some legislation and some legislative language that deals with it. For example, one of the things that happens here in Chicago is that we've actually, in the Principals Association, tried to deal with 2 elements of that. I've talked about the expulsion piece, but another thing that's connected to those high expulsion rates is that the money for those students, once they go back, because when they're expelled, the district puts them back into regular public schools, but does not give the funding for those students to those schools. And so we have a 2-pronged problem. And so we've written legislation. We haven't introduced it yet, but we've written legislation that says, I don't have the exact language memorized, but in effect, that a charter school cannot expel a student for an offense that is not an expellable offense at a public school, right?
Yeah.
When we told a particular state legislator about the issue with the money not following the student back to the school, he looked at me and said, well, I thought we took care of that. And so he pulled up some legislation and began to read it. And it said right there in the legislation, he was reading, said, yes, when the student is expelled from the charter school, the per pupil funding for that student shall be returned to the, and then he stopped himself and shook his head. And the word that followed was not school. The word that followed was district. And so the money's coming back to CPS, but CPS is not putting that money into the school that student enrolls in. Instead, they're wasting it on whatever mayoral priority or lack of priority that they want to waste that money on.
Hi,
Right.
I just want to interject a question here. It seems like there's a kind of lack of leadership, a void of leadership in this important area of education that you're describing, that you come out of. And so, I mean, into that void, are you tempted, thinking about stepping up into that void of leadership to provide better leadership for this city in this important area? I mean, is that a good avenue? Is that a potential avenue for you?
So I think I stepped up the moment I decided to become a teacher. And I think I've been continuously stepping up, and it's been this very interesting progression, right? You become a teacher and you work your way through your first year and you have a bad first year like every first year teacher. And then eventually you become good and effective. And you see kids doing things in your classroom that they don't seem to be able to do in other classrooms or in the hall. And you go, man, if I were the dean of students, because I can't impact from my classroom, I can't impact what's happening out there in the hallway. But if I were the dean of students or the assistant principal, maybe I can have a larger impact so that what happens in my classroom, the good things that happen in my classroom can happen all over the school. So you become an assistant principal or dean of students, and you see the impact you're able to have. But you're still working under somebody else's leadership, and there's some things you think you want to try, that if you led a school, that there's some successes that you can have that you cannot have in your current role. So you become a principal. And in my case, I became a principal. I was principal of Blaine Elementary School. We went from 79% of our students meet standards to 89% of our students meeting standards. 43% of black students were meeting standards when I got there. The number was almost 80 2 years later. But as we're having this success, once again, some outside force begins to negatively impact the resources that are available to you to continue that success. And in my case, those outside resources were the Board of Education and the mayor of Chicago. one incompetent policy after another. And so once again, I felt like I had to, as a principal, begin to step up in my current role as a principal, which my current role then, which is my current role, as a principal. And then the opportunity to be the president of the Principals Association arose, and I took advantage of that opportunity to become a larger voice for principals.
So next?
In Chicago, we don't have an elected school board. We have a mayor who appoints the school. And so if you want to impact education policy, you have to have some power in City Hall. You have to run City Hall. And so more and more I've been considering, I think I'm in the, what you would call pre-exploratory phase of running for mayor of Chicago. And it's not just about schools. This is extremely important to understand for the general public and for principals in general, or educators in general. People have to see the connections that when I was an assistant principal at a school called Johnson, which was a majority black school on the west side, my kindergartners would come to school on day one, several years behind the students and the kindergartners at the majority white school that I was principal of on the north side. Day one of kindergarten, and they're already behind. How is Johnson a failing school? And the kids are years behind on day one. Those kids have been failed long before they ever reach the school system. And they've been failed by the things that a mayor is responsible for, that an alderman or city councilman is responsible for, that a state legislator is responsible for. Even when you look at what the parent is responsible for, how do we get the parent through our elected representatives and through, as a society, the things that they need so that they can meet the responsibilities that they have.
So I want to say thank you to Troy. I really appreciate your being on. I'd love to have you on for a whole hour at some future point to keep us updated on what's going on in Chicago. I want to thank you, Alison, for pitching in and being my foreign correspondent, so to speak.
Great, Lauren.
Yeah. And I want to just say to my audience that my show tomorrow is going to be with a friend of mine, an activist here in Los Angeles by the name of Andrea Leon Grossman. And she is the Southern California organizer with Food and Water Watch. So I'm looking forward to tomorrow's show at 7 p.m. Pacific time on this channel. So for now, I want to thank again my guest, Troy, and my correspondent, Alison, there at the People's Summit, and say thank you all for watching and keep resisting.